Long-range sensors detected massive ships approaching from deep space, and they were bigger than anything anyone had ever seen before. The vessels were so enormous that they made even the largest Valkyrian battleships look like tiny insects by comparison. Captain Dongwu realized that the alien fleet around Earth was not the main Valkyrian force, but just a small part of something much more terrifying. Dr. Shin the Jin was analyzing the sensor data when she made a discovery that shocked everyone. The approaching fleet was not coming to attack Earth, they were fleeing from something even more dangerous. The massive ships were damaged and moving erratically as if they had been in a desperate battle that had lasted for months or maybe even years. Ensign Yoon Hae-won intercepted communications between the Valkyrian ships and translated them with growing amazement. Lord Admiral Exvar was not trying to conquer Earth at all, he was trying to find a place where his people could hide from an ancient enemy that had returned from the dead. The mighty Valkyrian Empire was collapsing, and Earth was their last hope for survival. Communications revealed a story that was almost impossible to believe 3,000 years ago. The Valkyrians had fought a war against an enemy they called the Devourers. These ancient beings had technology that was beyond even Valkyrian understanding, and they had nearly destroyed the galaxy before mysteriously vanishing. The Valkyrians had built their empire on the ruins left behind, thinking the Devourers were gone forever. The Devourers had not died, they had been sleeping in the dark spaces between galaxies, waiting for the right time to return. Now they were awake and hungry, and they were systematically destroying every world the Valkyrians had ever conquered. The proud empire that had ruled the stars for millennia was being torn apart, piece by piece. Dr. Shin the Jin realized that this information changed everything about their desperate mission. The bio-neural network that connected all Valkyrian ships was not just a military tool, it was a survival mechanism that helped the aliens coordinate their retreat from an enemy that could not be fought or reasoned. With the network was their only hope of staying organized while their civilization collapsed around them. But Captain Dongwu was not interested in helping the aliens who had tried to exterminate humanity. The Valkyrians had destroyed human colonies and killed millions of innocent people just because they were looking for a place to hide from their own enemies. They had chosen to make humanity their victim instead of asking for help. The plan to inject a virus into the bio-neural network suddenly became even more important. If they could collapse the Valkyrian command structure, the alien fleet would scatter in panic, making it impossible for them to establish a foothold in human space. The Devourers could deal with the Valkyrians somewhere else far away from Earth, and human colonies. Park So-young studied the tactical situation and realized they had a narrow window of opportunity. The massive Devourer ships were still several days away from Earth's solar system, but they were closing fast. The Valkyrian fleet was already showing signs of panic as their commanders realized they were trapped between humanity's unexpected resistance and their ancient enemies approaching from behind. The virus that Dr. Shin had designed would need to be modified to take advantage of the alien psychological state. The Valkyrians were already afraid and confused, and the right kind of neural feedback could amplify those emotions until their shared consciousness collapsed completely. It would be like shouting in a crowded theater and watching the panic spread from person to person. Sergeant Choi Minho prepared the ship's weapon systems for the most dangerous mission they had ever attempted. They would need to get close enough to the enemy flagship to establish a direct neural link while simultaneously fighting off hundreds of smaller vessels that would try to protect their command ship. The Indomitable would be outnumbered by thousands to one. Chief Engineer Kim Tae-min worked frantically to stabilize the space-time drive for one final jump. The exotic matter reserves were almost exhausted, and the containment system was showing critical stress fractures. One mistake could cause an explosion that would destroy not just their ship but potentially tear a hole in space-time itself. The modified virus was ready, and Dr. Shin had programmed it to spread through the bio-neural network like wildfire. It would target the fear centers in Valkyrian brains, amplifying their natural terror response until the shared consciousness became unbearable. Every ship connected to the network would experience overwhelming panic. Simultaneously, Captain Dongwu assembled his crew for what everyone knew would be their final mission. Briefing: they had already achieved the impossible by surviving this long against overwhelming odds. But now they were being asked to do something even more dangerous. They would have to maintain physical contact with the enemy flagship long enough for the virus to upload completely. The crew listened in silence as their captain explained exactly how dangerous this mission would be. The Indomitable would have to drop out of dimensional fold space right next to the most heavily defended ship in the Valkyrian fleet. They would be surrounded by weapons that could vaporize them instantly, and their only protection would be the aliens' reluctance to damage their own command vessel. Yun-Hei-1 had discovered something important in the intercepted communications. The Valkyrian flagship contained not just Lord Admiral Lexvar, but also the high command of the entire fleet. If the neurovirus worked correctly, it would not just cause panic among the regular ships, it would also drive the enemy leaders completely insane. The timing had to be perfect. They would have exactly 90 seconds to establish the neural link upload the virus and escape before the enemy ships recovered from their initial shock. If they stayed too long, the Valkyrians would overcome their reluctance to fire on their own flagship, and the Indomitable would be destroyed by concentrated fire from hundreds of weapons. Dr. Shin warned everyone that the virus upload process would be visible to the Valkyrian commanders. They would know exactly what the humans were trying to do, and they would fight desperately to break the connection before the program could spread through their network. The enemy would throw everything they had at the human ship. Kim Taemin made his final preparations to the space-time drive, knowing that this jump would probably destroy the exotic matter containment system. The dimensional stress from materializing so close to such a massive bioship would be enormous, and their hull was already weakened from hours of combat. As they prepared for the final assault, sensors detected the first Devourer scout ships entering the outer solar system. The ancient enemies of the Valkyrians had arrived sooner than expected, and now there were three different forces converging on Earth: the desperate aliens, the vengeful Devourers, and one small human warship carrying the hopes of an entire species. Captain Dongwu gave the order, and the Indomitable vanished from normal space one last time, heading directly toward the heart of the enemy fleet and a confrontation that would determine the fate of not just humanity, but the entire galaxy. The final battle was about to begin. The Indomitable materialized so close to the Valkyrian flagship that their hulls were almost touching, and the massive alien bioship filled the entire viewscreen like a living mountain made of metal and flesh. Captain Dongwu had never seen anything so enormous up close, and he could feel the ship shaking from the electromagnetic interference generated by the enemy vessel's organic systems. At this distance, the flagship's massive weapons could not target the small human warship because their gun ports were designed for long-range combat against large targets. The Indomitable was like a mosquito that had landed on an elephant's back, too small and too close for the giant to swat effectively. But the proximity was putting enormous strain on both ships' defensive systems. Dr. Shin Dajin worked frantically at her console, trying to establish a connection with the alien bio-neural network. The Valkyrian technology was unlike anything in human databases, and she had to decode their quantum encryption protocols in real time, while the ship shook violently from being so close to the massive enemy vessel. Every few seconds she would make progress, only to have the connection break when the ship's fields interfered with each other. Alien bioship was alive in ways that human science barely understood. Its hull was not just armor but skin that could feel pain, and its weapons were not just tools but organs that could experience fear. The entire vessel was essentially a gigantic brain floating in space, connected to thousands of other brains across the fleet. Lieutenant Park So-young coordinated defensive fire against smaller Valkyrian vessels that were swarming around the flagship like angry wasps trying to protect their queen. The human ship's weapons were overwhelmed by the sheer number of targets, but she managed to keep the most dangerous attackers at bay by targeting their weapon systems, instead of trying to destroy them completely inside the Valkyrian flagship. Lord Admiral Lexvar realized what the humans were attempting, and for the first time in his long military career, he felt genuine terror. The bio-neural network was the Empire's most closely guarded secret, developed over millennia to create perfect coordination between their fleets. No alien species had ever discovered its existence, let alone found a way to exploit its weaknesses. The neural network was more than just a communication system. It was the collective consciousness that bound Valkyrian civilization together. Every ship captain shared thoughts and emotions with every other captain, creating a hive mind that could react to threats faster than any individual could think. But this same connection made them vulnerable to psychological attacks that could spread like wildfire. Sergeant Choi Min-ho faced the most dangerous task in the mission. He had to use the ship's mining lasers to surgically target specific neural clusters that Dr. Shin had identified on the enemy flagship. The clusters were tiny compared to the massive bioship, and hitting them required precision that pushed his targeting systems beyond their designed limits. One wrong shot would destroy the neural cluster, completely breaking the connection before the virus could upload. But if his shots were too weak, the cluster would heal itself faster than the program could establish a permanent link. Choi had to damage the alien biotechnology just enough to create an opening without destroying the very thing they needed to access. The bioship's hull was covered in sensors that could detect the mining lasers targeting the neural clusters, and the alien crew began frantically trying to move their ship away from the human vessel. But the Indomitable was locked onto the flagship using magnetic grapples that Kim Tae-min had deployed at the last second. The two ships were now physically connected, and neither could escape. Dr. Shin finally established a stable connection with the bio-neural network and began uploading the viral program that would spread panic throughout the Valkyrian fleet. The process was like performing brain surgery on a patient who was awake and fighting back. Every few seconds, the alien systems would try to purge the foreign code, and she would have to find new ways to maintain the connection. The virus was designed to exploit the deepest fears embedded in Valkyrian psychology. It would amplify their natural terror of the devourers and spread that panic through the shared consciousness until rational thought became impossible. The program was elegant in its simplicity but devastating in its effects. As the upload progressed, the effects began spreading through nearby ships. The bio-neural network carried the panic signals faster than electronic communication, and Valkyrian crews started experiencing overwhelming fear and confusion. Some vessels began firing randomly at empty space, while others collided with their own allies as their navigation systems became unreliable. Chief Engineer Kim Tae-min monitored the spacetime drive and watched the exotic matter reserves dropping toward zero. The dimensional stress from maintaining such close proximity to the massive bioship was tearing their hull apart, and structural alerts were sounding on every deck. The Indomitable was literally being pulled apart by gravitational forces that no human ship had ever been designed to withstand. Hull breaches were reported on multiple levels, and emergency force fields were the only thing keeping the crew from being sucked into space. The ship's superstructure was groaning under stresses that would have destroyed any conventional vessel hours ago. Only the experimental materials used in the Indomitable's construction were keeping them alive. Ensign Yoon Hae-won intercepted communications from across the Valkyrian fleet and translated them with growing excitement. The neural cascade was working better than anyone had hoped. Ships throughout the Armada were reporting system failures and crew panic as the viral program spread from mine to mine through the bio-neural network. But the upload was taking longer than expected. The Valkyrian flagship's biosystems were fighting back with increasing desperation. As they recognized the foreign program as a mortal threat, the alien ship's immune systems were adapting to the virus faster than Dr. Shin had anticipated, and she had to constantly modify the program to stay ahead of their countermeasures. Lord Admiral Vexvar appeared on the human ship's communication screen, his alien features twisted with rage and despair. He offered Captain Dongwoo anything he wanted in exchange for stopping the upload. The Valkyrian commander promised to withdraw his fleet immediately and never return to human space if the humans would just break the neural connection, but Dongwoo refused the offer. The Valkyrians had come to Earth with the intention of enslaving or destroying humanity, and only their own desperate situation had prevented them from carrying out genocide. The Admiral's promises meant nothing because his empire was already collapsing, and he had no authority to make deals with anyone. The viral cascade reached critical mass just as the Indomitable's exotic matter reserves hit zero. The spacetime drive shut down automatically to prevent a containment breach that would have destroyed both ships. Kim Tae-min managed to activate the emergency thrusters and push their vessel away from the flagship. Seconds before the neural feedback reached its peak across the Valkyrian fleet, bioships began shutting down as their shared consciousness collapsed under the weight of amplified terror and confusion. Massive vessels that had conquered hundreds of worlds now drifted powerless as their crews experienced psychological breakdown on a scale that had never been seen before. The neural cascade was spreading faster than light through quantum entanglement connections, jumping from ship to ship across interstellar distances. Even Valkyrian vessels in other star systems were beginning to experience system failures as the panic virus reached them through the bio-neural network. Dr. Shin monitored the cascade's progress with a mixture of fascination and horror. She had created a weapon that attacked the mind itself, and watching its effects spread through an entire civilization was both thrilling and terrifying. The virus was working exactly as designed, but its success meant the psychological destruction of millions of sentient beings. The Valkyrian flagship was among the first to succumb completely. Its biosystems shut down one by one as the neural feedback overloaded every organic circuit in the massive vessel. Lord Admiral Vexvar's final transmission was intercepted by Yoon Hae-won, and his words were filled with respect for the tactical brilliance of his human enemies, but victory had come at a terrible cost. The Indomitable was crippled and drifting in space with hull breaches on 12 decks and most of its systems offline. The crew had survived the impossible mission, but their ship might not survive long enough for them to enjoy their triumph. Then long-range sensors detected something that changed everything. The approaching Devourer fleet had suddenly altered course and was now heading away from Earth at maximum speed toward the galactic rim. The ancient enemies of the Valkyrians had detected the neural cascade and decided that discretion was the better part of valor. The collapse of the Valkyrian Empire was total and irreversible. 3,000 years of galactic domination had ended in a matter of hours, brought down by a single human warship and the ingenuity of its crew. But as they watched the last enemy vessels flee into deep space, the crew realized they had done something far greater than saving Earth. They had accidentally liberated the entire galaxy. The Indomitable appeared right in the middle of the Valkyrian fleet like a ghost ship, materializing from another world. The space-time drive had worked perfectly, and now the human warship was surrounded by enemy vessels that were 10 times bigger and 1,000 times more powerful. Captain Dong-woo wasted no time and immediately ordered his crew to attack the nearest alien battleship. The Valkyrians had never seen anything like this in 3,000 years of conquest. Their advanced sensors had not detected the human ship approaching because it had not traveled through normal space. Instead, it had bent reality itself to appear exactly where Captain Dong-woo wanted it to be. The alien commanders were so shocked that for several precious seconds they did not know how to respond. Lieutenant Park So-young quickly identified the weakest points on the enemy ships and began coordinating surgical strikes against their vital systems. She had studied every piece of data about Valkyrian bioships, and now she put that knowledge to deadly use. Her targeting solutions were perfect, and each shot from the Indomitable hit exactly where it would do the most damage. The alien ships were living creatures as much as they were machines. Their hulls were made of biometal that could heal itself, and their weapons were organic systems that drew power from the ship's life force. They had evolved over millions of years to be the perfect killing machines, but they had one weakness that no one had ever discovered until now. Down in the weapons bay, Sergeant Choi Min-ho was loading the experimental quantum phase ammunition that Dr. Shin That-jin had developed. These special rounds could disrupt the molecular bonds that held living tissue together. When they hit the alien bioships, the damage spread like a disease, eating away at the organic hull from the inside out. The first Valkyrian battleship that the Indomitable attacked began to die in a way that terrified the other alien crews. The quantum phase rounds burrowed into its living hull and caused massive internal bleeding. The great ship twisted and writhed like a wounded animal as its biosystems failed one after another. Within minutes, the mighty vessel was nothing but floating wreckage. Lord Admiral Vexvar watched from his flagship as the impossible happened. One small human ship was destroying his most powerful vessels using weapons that should not have been able to penetrate their bio-armor he had personally commanded the conquest of 200 worlds, and he had never seen anything like this. The humans were using technology that seemed to violate the basic laws of physics. Chief Engineer Kim Taemin was monitoring the space-time drive and reporting stress readings that made everyone nervous. The exotic matter that powered their teleportation system was being consumed faster than expected, and the hull was developing microfractures from the dimensional stress. Each jump through folded space put enormous strain on the ship's structure. The Indomitable used hit-and-run tactics, appearing long enough to destroy an enemy vessel before vanishing again into folded space. The Valkyrian ships tried to surround the human warship, but it was like trying to catch smoke with their bare hands. Every time they thought they had the Indomitable trapped, it would disappear and reappear somewhere else. Communications Specialist Ensign Yoon Hae-won was intercepting alien transmissions and translating them in real time. She discovered that the Valkyrian commanders were becoming increasingly desperate as they watched their fleet being picked apart by a single enemy ship. Their bio-neural network was carrying panic signals from ship to ship as crews realized they were facing something beyond their understanding. Dr. Shin De-jin was analyzing the wreckage of destroyed alien vessels and making fascinating discoveries about their biotechnology. The Valkyrian ships were not just alive, they were all connected to each other through quantum neural links that allowed them to share information instantly. This connection made them incredibly coordinated in battle, but it also meant they shared each other's pain and fear. After 6 hours of hit-and-run attacks, the Indomitable had destroyed over 50 enemy vessels and damaged hundreds more. The space around Earth was filled with burning wreckage, and the Valkyrian fleet was in complete disarray. Lord Admiral Vexvar had never experienced defeat before, and he was struggling to understand how his superior forces were being beaten by primitive humans. But the human ship was paying a heavy price for its victories. Kim Taemin reported that they had maybe a dozen more jumps before the space-time drive would fail completely. The exotic matter reserves were nearly exhausted, and the hull stress was approaching critical levels. Several decks had already been sealed off due to structural damage. Captain Dongwoo realized they needed to end this battle quickly, or they would be stranded in the middle of thousands of angry alien warships. His crew had performed miracles, but even miracles had limits. The Indomitable was just one ship against an entire armada, and eventually their luck would run out. The answer to their problem came from an unexpected source. During a brief pause between attacks, Dr. Shin De-jin made a discovery that would change everything. She had been studying the quantum neural network that connected all the Valkyrian ships, and she realized that their greatest strength was also their most dangerous weakness. The bio-neural links that allowed the alien ships to coordinate perfectly also made them vulnerable to a cascading feedback attack. If they could inject the right kind of signal into the network, they could overload every connected ship simultaneously. It would be like poisoning the shared consciousness that bound the fleet together. Park So-young confirmed Dr. Shin's theory by analyzing the movement patterns of the enemy vessels. The Valkyrian ships were not just communicating with each other, they were sharing a collective mind. When one ship was damaged, all the others felt its pain. When one ship detected an enemy, all the others immediately knew where to look. The plan was incredibly dangerous. They would need to get close enough to the enemy flagship to establish a direct connection with the bio-neural network. Then they would have to maintain that connection long enough to upload a specially designed virus that would spread through the entire fleet. The process would take several minutes, during which the Indomitable would be a sitting target. Kim Taemin warned that keeping the space-time drive active for that long would almost certainly destroy their ship. The exotic matter containment system was already showing critical stress readings, and one more major malfunction could cause a cascade failure that would vaporize everything within 100 kilometers. But they had no choice. The battle was turning against them as the Valkyrians adapted to their tactics. The alien ships were starting to work together more effectively, using their bio-neural network to predict where the Indomitable would appear next. Soon the hit-and-run strategy would stop working, and they would be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Captain Dongwoo called his senior officers together and explained the desperate plan. They would have one chance to strike at the heart of the Valkyrian command structure. If they succeeded, they might destroy the entire enemy fleet. If they failed, humanity would die and Earth would burn. The crew voted unanimously to attempt the mission even though they all knew it was essentially suicide. They had watched their homeworld burning in the distance and seen the orbital defense platforms destroyed by alien weapons. If they were going to die, they would take as many enemies with them as possible as they prepared for what might be their final battle. Long-range sensors detected something that changed everything completely. Captain Lee Dong-woo stood on the bridge of the warship, indomitable, and watched the screens showing space around Earth. His hands were steady, but his heart was beating fast because what he saw was the most terrible sight any human had ever witnessed. Thousands and thousands of alien warships filled the darkness between the stars, like angry metal insects ready to destroy everything humans had ever built. The Valkyrian Empire had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years and no one had ever stopped them. They were like gods of war with ships bigger than cities and weapons that could crack planets in half. Every species that had tried to fight them was now dust floating in space. The Valkyrians did not just win battles, they erased entire civilizations from existence as if they had never lived at Uldongwu. Remembered the reports from the outer colonies just 2 weeks ago. The Valkyrian fleet had appeared without warning and turned thriving human worlds into burning rocks in less than a day. Millions of people had died in minutes, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. The aliens had technology that seemed like magic compared to human weapons. Lieutenant Park So-young sat at the tactical station and her voice was calm even though everyone knew they were about to die. She read the numbers out loud, and each one was worse than the last 5,000 enemy battleships, 2,000 support vessels, weapon systems that Earth scientists did not even understand. The entire human defense fleet had been destroyed 3 hours ago, and only the Indomitable remained. The bridge was quiet except for the soft humming of computers and the breathing of the crew. Everyone knew this was the end of everything they had ever known and loved. Earth hung behind them like a blue jewel, and it would soon be nothing but rocks and fire like all the other worlds the Valkyrians had conquered down. In the engine room, Chief Engineer Kim Taemin was working like a man possessed. He had been pushing the experimental reactor beyond all safety limits for the past 6 hours, and the whole ship was shaking from the power flowing through its systems. The reactor was humanity's most advanced technology, but it was still primitive compared to what the aliens used. Kim wiped sweat from his face and checked the readings again. The exotic matter that powered their secret weapon was stable for now, but he did not know how much longer it would last. Nobody had ever tested the space-time drive-in real combat because it was too dangerous. One mistake could tear a hole in reality itself and destroy not just their ship, but maybe the entire solar system. On the main screen, Lord Admiral Vexvar appeared, and his alien face was like something from a nightmare. His skin was gray and covered in scales, and his eyes were black holes that seemed to swallow light. He had personally commanded the destruction of over 200 worlds, and he spoke to humans like they were insects that had annoyed him. The alien commander's words came through the translator in a voice that sounded like grinding metal. He told Captain Dong-woo that humanity had 1 hour to surrender completely. If they gave up now, some humans might be allowed to live as slaves. If they continued to resist, every man, woman, and child on Earth would die in the most painful way possible. Dong-woo looked around at his crew and saw fear in their eyes, but also something else. He saw determination and anger and the stubborn human refusal to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. These 200 people were all that stood between Earth and total destruction. They were the last hope for the human race. Weapons officer Sergeant Choi Min-ho was checking his targeting systems for the 100th time. His weapons were loaded with experimental ammunition that had never been tested in battle. The quantum phase rounds were supposed to be able to damage the alien bioships, but nobody knew if they would actually work. Communications Specialist Ensign Yoon Hae-won was monitoring alien transmissions and trying to learn their tactical patterns. She had discovered that the Valkyrian ships were somehow connected to each other in ways that human technology could not fully understand. They moved together like parts of a single giant organism. Dr. Shin, the Jin, the ship's science officer, was still studying the data they had collected from previous battles. She had made some interesting discoveries about how the alien ships worked. but there had not been enough time to fully understand what she had learned. The enemy biotechnology was unlike anything humans had ever encountered. The hour was almost up, and the Valkyrian fleet was moving into attack formation. Their ships looked like living creatures made of metal and flesh with weapons that glowed like angry red eyes. Earth's orbital defense platforms were already firing, but their weapons barely scratched the alien hulls. Dongwu made the decision that would either save humanity or doom them all. He ordered Kim Tae-min to activate the experimental space-time drive, knowing that they might all die in the attempt. The bridge crew looked at him with trust and fear, knowing their captain was asking them to jump into the unknown. The space-time drive had been developed in secret over the past 5 years, using theories that most scientists said were impossible. It could bend space and time around the ship, allowing it to appear anywhere instantly, but the technology was so new and dangerous that even the engineers who built it were not sure it would work. As the final seconds ticked away, Kim Tae-min's voice came over the intercom, telling everyone to prepare for displacement. The exotic matter in the reactor was glowing brighter than the sun, and the whole ship was vibrating like a guitar string that had been plucked too hard. The Valkyrian fleet launched their attack, and thousands of bioplasma torpedoes streaked toward Earth like falling stars. Each one carried enough power to destroy a city, and there were so many that they lit up space like a deadly fireworks displaying that moment as death approached from the stars. Dongwu gave the order that would change everything. The Indomitable vanished from normal space in a flash of blue light, leaving only empty vacuum where it had been. The alien torpedoes passed through nothing and continued toward Earth's doomed orbital platforms, but the human warship had not been destroyed. It had gone somewhere else entirely, using technology that the Valkyrians had never seen before. Captain Dongwu and his crew were about to begin humanity's impossible counterattack against an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. The last stand had become the first strike. The space around Earth was filled with drifting Valkyrian warships that had once been the terror of the galaxy, but were now nothing more than silent hulks floating in the darkness. The neural cascade had spread through their bio-neural network faster than anyone had imagined possible, and within hours the mighty fleet that had threatened to destroy humanity was completely powerless. Captain Dongwu stood on the damaged bridge of the Indomitable and watched the aftermath of their impossible victory. The ship's hull was cracked in dozens of places, and emergency force fields were the only thing keeping the crew alive. Most of their systems were offline, and they were running on backup power that would last maybe 6 more hours. Dr. Shin, the Jin, monitored the cascade's progress through her damaged computers and reported that the viral program was still spreading across the galaxy. Every Valkyrian ship and installation connected to the bio-neural network was experiencing the same psychological breakdown that had crippled the fleet around Earth. The collapse was happening faster than she had ever thought possible. The virus had been designed to exploit specific fears embedded deep in Valkyrian psychology, but it was proving more effective than anyone had dared hope. The shared consciousness that had made the aliens so powerful in battle was now carrying panic and madness to every corner of their empire like a plague that infected minds instead of bodies. Lieutenant Park So-young was coordinating damage control teams throughout the ship, but the reports kept getting worse. 12 decks had hull breaches, and the structural integrity of the main hull was compromised beyond repair. The Indomitable had survived the battle, but it might not survive much longer without major repairs that were impossible to perform in space. Chief Engineer Kim Tae-min was working desperately to keep the life support systems functioning, but the exotic matter containment breach had damaged power relays throughout the ship. They had maybe enough energy left for one emergency jump through folded space, but after that they would be completely helpless. Lord Admiral Exvar's flagship was drifting nearby, and there was no response to communication attempts. The massive bioship appeared to be dead, its organic systems shut down by neural feedback that had overwhelmed every living circuit in the vessel. The proud commander who had conquered 200 worlds was presumably trapped inside his own dying ship. Ensign Yoon Hae-won was intercepting transmissions from across the galaxy and translating reports of chaos and collapse from every Valkyrian world. The neural cascade had reached their home systems, and even civilian Populations were experiencing the psychological effects the empire that had ruled for 3,000 years was dying before their eyes, but the victory felt hollow as the crew realized the true cost of what they had accomplished. The Valkyrian Empire had been brutal and oppressive, but it had also been the only thing standing between the galaxy and something far worse. The Devourers were still out there in the dark spaces between stars, and now there was nothing to stop them. Dr. Shin had analyzed the intercepted communications about the ancient enemy, and what she learned was terrifying. The Devourers were not just another conquering species. They were something that consumed entire civilizations, leaving nothing behind but empty space. They had been dormant for millennia, but now they were awake and hungry. The approaching Devourer fleet had detected the neural cascade and changed course, but they were not fleeing in fear. They were simply looking for easier prey now that the Valkyrian Empire was no longer able to resist them. The ancient enemy would find other worlds to devour while the galaxy burned. In Chaos, Dongwu realized that humanity had won a battle but possibly lost the war. The Valkyrians had been tyrants, but they had also been the galaxy's defenders against something much worse. Now that defense was gone and every civilized world was vulnerable to an enemy that could not be reasoned with or defeated, the communication systems picked up desperate transmissions from dozens of species that had been enslaved by the Valkyrians. These alien civilizations were celebrating their freedom, but they had no idea what was coming for them. The Devourers would find them helpless and unprepared for the horror that was approaching. Kim Taemin reported that he had managed to stabilize the power systems, enough for one final jump, but they would have to choose their destination carefully. The spacetime drive would burn out completely after this last use, leaving them stranded wherever they decided to go. The crew gathered on the bridge to discuss their options. They could return to Earth and report their victory to the human government, but their ship was too damaged to be of much use in defending against the Devourer threat. They could try to reach one of the liberated alien worlds and warn them about what was coming, but there was little chance anyone would believe them. Dr. Shin suggested a third option that was both brilliant and terrifying. They could use their final jump to reach the Devourer fleet directly and try to study the ancient enemy before they reached populated systems. It was essentially a suicide mission, but the information they gathered might be crucial for defending the galaxy. Park So-young supported the idea, arguing that they had already achieved the impossible once and might be able to do it again. The Devourers had technology that was beyond current understanding, but humanity had proven that innovation and creativity could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Choi Min-ho was less optimistic, pointing out that their weapons had been specifically designed to exploit Valkyrian biotechnology. The Devourers were completely different, and their quantum phase ammunition might be useless against ancient alien defenses that had survived since before the current galaxy existed. Yoon Hae-won had been analyzing the Devourer communications and discovered something interesting. The ancient enemy was not a single unified force, but rather multiple fleets that operated independently. If they could find a way to turn the Devourers against each other, they might be able to buy time for the galaxy to organize some kind of defense. The debate continued for an hour, while their power reserves steadily drained away. Finally, Captain Dongwu made the decision that would determine not just their fate, but possibly the future of all life in the galaxy. They would use their final jump to intercept the nearest Devourer fleet and gather intelligence about the ancient enemy. It was a desperate gamble by a crew that had already used up several lifetimes' worth of luck, but they were the only humans who had experience fighting impossible odds and winning against alien empires. They had destroyed the Valkyrian fleet with nothing but courage and ingenuity, and now they would try to do the same thing again. As Kim Taemin prepared the spacetime drive for its final activation, the crew recorded messages to their families on Earth, knowing they would probably never see home again. They had saved humanity once, and now they were volunteering to risk everything again for the sake of species they had never met on worlds they would never see. The Indomitable's engines came online one last time, filling the ship with the familiar vibration that had carried them through so many impossible battles. The damaged hull groaned under the stress, but held together as exotic matter flowed through the containment system. For the final time, Captain Dongwu gave the order, and the human warship vanished from normal space, heading toward an encounter with the oldest and most dangerous enemy the galaxy had ever known. The price of victory was about to become clear. They were no longer fighting for Earth, they were fighting for everyone. 6 months after the battle that destroyed the Valkyrian Empire, Captain Lee Dongwu stood on the observation deck of humanity's newest space station and watched ships from dozens of different species arrive to establish diplomatic relations. With Earth, the galaxy had changed completely, and humanity found itself at the center of a transformation that no one could have predicted. The Indomitable had survived its final mission against the Devourer fleet, but just barely. The ancient enemy had proven to be even more dangerous than the Valkyrians, but they had also revealed a crucial weakness. They were divided into competing factions that had been fighting each other for millions of years, and turning them against each other had bought the galaxy precious time. Shin Dajin had become the most important scientist in known space after discovering how to communicate with the Devourers through quantum resonance patterns. The ancient beings were not evil in the way humans understood the concept. They were simply following their nature as cosmic recyclers who consumed dying civilizations to make room for new life. The negotiations with the Devourers had been the most difficult diplomatic challenge in galactic history, but Dr. Shin had found a way to convince them that the current galaxy was not ready for recycling. The ancient beings had agreed to return to their dormant state for another 1,000 years, giving the younger species time to mature and spread among the stars. Lieutenant Park So-young, who was now Commander Park, had been promoted to lead Earth's first interspecies military academy, where officers from hundreds of different worlds came to learn the tactical principles that had brought down the Valkyrian Empire. Her courses on adaptive thinking and unconventional warfare were already legendary. The Academy taught that victory came not from having the biggest weapons or the most ships, but from being able to see solutions that others missed. Human creativity and refusal to accept defeat had impressed species across the galaxy, and many young aliens wanted to learn how to think like humans. Chief Engineer Kim Taeman led the team that was reverse engineering captured Valkyrian biotechnology and combining it with human innovation to create hybrid systems that surpassed what either species could achieve alone. The new generation of human ships incorporated living components that could self-repair and adapt while maintaining the unpredictable creativity that made them so effective. The space-time drive had been perfected and no longer required dangerous exotic matter. Instead, drawing power directly from quantum fluctuations in empty space, the technology that had seemed impossible just months earlier was now being shared freely with any species that requested it. Sergeant Choi Min-ho had established training programs for gunners and weapons specialists from across the galaxy, teaching them that precision was more important than raw firepower. His students learned to find weak points in enemy defenses and exploit them with minimal force rather than trying to overwhelm opponents through brute strength. The philosophy of using intelligence instead of violence was spreading throughout the galaxy. A species that had been oppressed by the Valkyrians discovered they could solve problems through cooperation rather than conquest. Wars between neighboring systems were becoming rare as diplomatic solutions became more popular. Ensign Yoon Hae-won had created the Galactic Communications Network, a voluntary system that connected species across known space without the controlling aspects of the Valkyrian bio-neural web. Her work ensured that information could flow freely while preserving each civilization's independence and cultural identity. The network allowed real-time translation between thousands of different languages and had already prevented several conflicts by enabling clear communication between species that had misunderstood each other's intentions. Cultural exchange programs were flourishing as beings from different worlds learned about each other's art, music, and philosophy. The Valkyrians themselves had not been destroyed despite the collapse of their empire. Many individual aliens had survived the neural cascade and were slowly recovering from the psychological trauma. Dr. Shin had developed therapy techniques that helped them overcome the artificial fears that had been implanted in their minds by centuries of military conditioning. Some Valkyrians had chosen to integrate into the new galactic community, bringing their advanced biotechnology and deep knowledge of space to benefit everyone. Others had formed small independent colonies where they could rebuild their civilization without the oppressive hierarchy that had defined their empire. The former slave species of the galaxy were experiencing a renaissance of culture and technology that had been suppressed for millennia under Valkyrian rule. Ancient art forms were being rediscovered, forgotten sciences were being developed, and new forms of government were being created based on cooperation rather than domination. Earth had become the unofficial capital of this new galactic alliance, not because humans demanded leadership, but because other species trusted human judgment and creativity. The human approach to problem solving had proven effective against impossible odds, and aliens from across the galaxy sought human advice on everything from military strategy to agricultural techniques. Captain Dongwu had been offered command of the entire galactic defense fleet, but he had chosen instead to captain the rebuilt Indomitable on exploration missions to contact isolated worlds and offer them friendship instead of conquest. The ship that had once faced impossible odds against the Valkyrian Empire now led peaceful expeditions to the far reaches of the galaxy. Each new world they discovered added to the growing alliance of free species, and the galaxy was becoming more diverse and vibrant than it had been in thousands of years. Trade networks were developing that benefited everyone, and scientific knowledge was being shared freely among all participating civilizations. The greatest change was in humanity itself. The species that had once been confined to a single solar system now found themselves citizens of the galaxy, with colonies being established on hundreds of worlds. Human explorers were pushing the boundaries of known space and making contact with civilizations that had been isolated for millennia, but humans had not forgotten the lessons learned during their desperate battle against the Valkyrian Empire. They maintained strong defenses and continued developing new technologies because they knew that the galaxy was full of dangers that had not yet been discovered. The Devourers were sleeping, but they would wake again someday. The human military academies